If you were born with Saturn aspecting Uranus in your natal chart, you are here on this planet with a very special mission. You are meant to unite your ideas with reality, structure with innovation, and individuality with social purpose. Let's dive in. My name is Anastasia. I'm a traditional Western astrologer specializing in readings, creating products, teaching lessons. There is a lot that I do. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I hope you enjoy being part of the community. If you've been here a while and you enjoy my work, please leave me a like, comment, subscribe, and press the notification bell. Watch more of my videos. I have forecasts, predictive readings, and horoscopes, as well as more general ones. There is something for everyone. You can also say thank you by buying me a tea, a coffee, a croissant, I love those, or any other gift that you would like. For working with me, if you have questions about your life, your future, your relationships, visit anastasiadoesastrology.com. On there you can see everything I offer. I am a teaching astrologer, and I have another course coming up dedicated to predictive astrology and using transits to forecast the future. Check out my website to see all the updates, and you can also book a reading on there. Highly recommend picking up my 2026 planner. I've been creating these since 2024. It started with a personal desire to have a tool that helps me navigate the year. It tells me what's coming up so I can take advantage of everything. This is 227 pages filled with insights about astrology, breakdowns of the months coming up, rituals for every lunation, intention setting pages, and so much more. I included the dates that are good for love, relationships, good luck, as well as more challenging dates. So it's a perfect tool. And I'd like to highlight my Saturn in Aquarius candle. We are talking about Saturn in an aspect to Uranus, and Saturn can be quite tricky and difficult at times, and when you use Saturn amulets and talismans that capture Saturn in its domicile, as this one does, it was created back when Saturn was in Aquarius, still in early 2023. This helps you be structured, pragmatic, and grounded, and use the turn-in energy to build things you want instead of getting trampled and pushed down by Saturn. So highly recommend this, especially if you were born with Saturn in Cancer, Leo, or Aries, which are the signs of fall and detriment, and for the next couple of years while Saturn is in its fall in Aries. All of that is on my website. Thank you so much for listening. These series of videos, Saturn videos, are inspired by Liz Green's book, Saturn, A New Look at an Old Devil. So I have to mention it as my primary source. So when we talk about Uranus and Saturn together, and in this video I talk about Saturn-Uranus aspects in a natal chart, and that is especially strong if you're born with Saturn-Uranus conjunction, which happens roughly every 45 years. The last time we've had it would have been between like late 1985 into very early 91. So if you were born with Saturn in Sagittarius and Saturn in Capricorn, Saturn was hanging out with Uranus quite closely, even though they weren't conjunct the whole time, but they were within the same sign, so it still counts. And before that, it would have been about 45 years before, and we're gonna receive it again pretty soon. But this aspect, I would also look at Saturn-Uranus opposition. If you have Saturn-Uranus trine or sextile or square, this will be important for you as well. So when we move on to Saturn and Uranus, with Uranus, we're looking at the outer planets, and those can be grouped together, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, as planets that deal with the collective unconscious. It's less personal, and so the qualities of Saturn and Uranus in your chart is not necessarily going to affect your personality and your look or anything like about your childhood, but it is more of the energy of the group that you belong to, right? Like, it's the energy that colors the time. And so it has to do with your soul consciousness less than, again, sort of personality consciousness. So since Saturn was conjunct Uranus all the way like in late 80s, early 90s, these aspects will describe a group of people, and a group of people that was potentially born in the climate that required some kind of unity between Saturn and Uranus. So usually outer planets represent, in modern astrology, people look at outer planets, and I'm a traditional astrologer, so I don't subscribe under that, but some modern astrologers, a lot of modern astrologers assign rulership to Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. They say Uranus rules Aquarius, Neptune Pisces, and Pluto Scorpio. And that is, I don't think, is quite correct. I think there is value in assigning co-rulership of those signs to the outer planets. But like I said, outer planets have to do with these group soul society type of energies, and so a lot of times they don't manifest in an obvious way. Uranus represents this inner urge to break away, to be an individual in any sense it entails, to have freedom, right? And it's not something you can necessarily see in a person until they start acting. And so a lot of times we tend to be unaware of the outer planets. And by transit, they tend to take us off guard, especially if you're talking about Uranus, right? Uranus can be disruptive. It is known as a great awakener, but it's not necessarily going to bring pleasant experiences, especially to people who are not self-aware. And the same goes for Neptune, the same goes for Pluto. Funny enough, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are all connected in the mythology with these kind of unique characters and gods. For Uranus, we have this creator and the father of the gods who ends up like disappearing from the Olympian pantheon after he gets castrated by Saturn. So he sort of like disappears, and Pluto rules the underworld and Neptune rules the sea. So they're kind of hidden, and they represent these energies as well. So with Uranus and Saturn together, they represent in the myth, right? Saturn is the one that castrates Uranus. Saturn is against Uranus. And if you think of Uranus as this urge to break away from confines of anything, and Saturn coming in and being like, you need structure, you're gonna die, there is all these like difficult things, it makes sense that Saturn will feel quite difficult and uncomfortable. So when you have Saturn and Uranus an aspect together, Saturn will represent tradition and a tendency to be skeptical and more structured and conservative in a lot of ways, a tendency to care less about the group and care more about creating safety and security, versus Uranus, other than being connected to Uranus in the myth, it's also connected to Prometheus. And Prometheus is all about, bringing fire from the gods down to earth. It's about exploration. It's about trying new things. So a lot of times when the person has these energies in their chart, they end up going through these cycles. They end up going like back and forward from being super conventional to being completely unconventional and breaking away. Or they will have this tension within themselves where Saturn wins, right? And they become fearful and they become very much attached to following the law and sort of very, conventional. Life needs to be a certain way, things need to be a certain way, to the opposite, to being this person who wants to be so different from everyone else and so unconventional. And the two are meant to work together. So if Uranus represents the free flow of ideas, it represents the intuition, it represents the connection between the mind and reality. And in the latest years, there's been done a lot of studies where we realize that the way we think affects our physical reality. And people talk about manifestation, and one of the big parts of manifestation is, of course, taking action, which is Saturn, but another part is thinking happy thoughts and visualizing. And so if anything, people born with Saturn Uranus together can unite these two. But before they do, there will be a lot of friction. There will be a lot of tension. And eventually they're meant to learn how to take something from the mind and trust that it's brilliant and worthy, and use Saturn to actually bring it into existence more often than not, with a potential for improving the world at large. So individual with Uranian energy tends to really seek the truth, right? Something that is maybe hasn't been done before. And so that's where the tension lies, right? Like Saturn might choose something that has been done before and has been proven safe and secure, but Saturn might be too restrictive and limited and like afraid of trying new things, versus Uranus will have a strong desire for new things, but sometimes not clarity about these new things, like doesn't always have, you know, a lot to put behind the ideas. Sometimes they're just like these like crazy ideas the person might have. So, you know, like I said, it does represent the energy of the world. Uranus has been discovered at the time of like technological revolution and big sort of, you know, dawn of electrical and industrial age, at the time of political revolution. So it does suggest that on some level our psyche was ready for that. So if you're born with like Saturn Uranus, Saturn will always try to, whichever planet Saturn aspects, we've been talking a lot about aspects between Saturn and other planets, Saturn will always challenge this planet. Saturn will always darken the planet, and the planet will try to express its free energy and like, you know, its real personality. So every planet will be challenged basically by Saturn. But there is great potential with a challenge. There is great opportunity to become this kind of hero of your world and unite with other like-minded individual and almost like step away, look beyond your fears and your ideas. Liz Green gives an example of like Hercules fighting Hydra and being unable to slay it until he went down to his knees and held Hydra to the light. So he sort of like needed to shift an approach. And so similarly in the individual born with this aspect, and I'm one of those people born with this aspect, you're meant to learn to step away from the fear, but use it in a healthy way, right? Like we need Saturn. We need Saturn to help us bring ideas into reality. And we need Uranus to conceive of ideas. So if you have this aspect, do share how it shows up in your life. Do you feel this friction between, you know, conventionality and desire to change things up? And do you feel like you like gravitate more towards being more conventional and traditional? Or do you feel like you're kind of a rebel and you're outside the law? But the truth is that ideally it should be about integrating the two. It's not about being completely individualistic, and it's not about being completely like, you know, self-reliant. It's about using your individual ideas, using your brilliance to help the world and make the world better. I hope this resonates. I think we're getting into more complicated territory as we start to look at the outer planets, because those tend to have these kind of like higher octave, very invisible, intangible energies sometimes. So here we're talking about like internal transformation, right? Bringing your ideas to reality, being able to unite innovation with structure and practicality, being able to have Saturnian approach to the mind and ideas, and then Uranian approach to Saturnian things. People with this aspect can really be good at innovating routines and coming up with like unusual ways of doing things that have been done before. Let's say you are like at a job. Let's say you have Saturn Uranus in the 10th house and you're working at a place where filing has always been done a certain way. Like you're working at a library, right? Saturn Uranus can inspire you to rearrange books in a brand new way that will actually inspire more people to read the books. So if this energy is unexpressed, it can show up as indecision, irritation, anxiety, like again, like I said, sort of this vacillation between being too afraid and too attached to the way things were always done versus being too independent and experimental. And like you really need to find balance between like caution and risk, self-discipline and experimentation, and work on your creative genius in a sustained, efficient, and productive way. So do share how this resonates. If this is you, I'm curious, and visit my website to see all of my offerings, book a reading, and pick up my creations as well. I'll see you soon. Bye.